I believe we have 3 members present, and I don't recall how many people are on the subcommittee.
It's not full, of course. So
I'm checking the list. I believe we need 4 for a quorum.
am I counting 6? Yeah,
6 voting members.
based on the last email membership. Yeah,
Well, I believe we have 5 voting members. You and I, Mark,
that's right.
Emily, Andrea, right? Oh, and Tony.
And Representative Anderson's.
I forgot to count myself. Okay, so there are 6 voting members, so we need 4 members present for a quorum. Looks like Andrea declined. We need Tony or Emily. Although if we're not, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was did I share my screen last time? I've got the slides ready to go.
You did. It worked. I don't think we're voting on anything today, so we could proceed in an advisory fashion if you'd like.
That would be my preference. But if there's an objection from anyone else, I think this is an information sharing opportunity. So
No objection here.
want to give it a minute to make sure we repeat ourselves if no one shows up.
Okay.
Of the joys, right, Mark? I feel like for me, it's been partly this headset, but I feel like Teams pushes out updates, sometimes they break things. Should we give it to like 12:05 and then just go ahead and start?
I'm fine with starting now, but I'll defer to you. I guess we can't approve the agenda. We could just read it off.
True. Looks like Mark might be trying to call in. Okay.
It's not coming up yet, Mark.
All right, that's.
There we go. Okay, we got Mark. So very good. Well, being that it's 12:06, I think we'll go ahead and call ourselves to order in an advisory capacity only. Given that I believe we only have 3 voting members of this bylaw subcommittee present. To make that official, Todd, do you want to call a roll?
Absolutely. Todd Albert, present. Scott Stauffer, present. Mark Landauer, present. Emily Gothard. Andrea Chiapella. Tony Hernandez. Rep Anderson. Okay, we have 3.
All right, well, good to see you, Todd and Mark, and the folks here in the audience. We'll go ahead and get started. I am hearing myself feedback a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably me. That any better?
Testing 1, 2, 3. That is better. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Sorry about that.
No worries. The joy of technology. I'll share my screen. And this will probably be, since it's an advisory meeting, I imagine fairly quick. That's my good. It seems like let me get situated on the screen here. Okay. All right. So I think that the main gist of what we want to do today is just start getting our heads wrapped around a hiring practice. And I think this was the meeting where we had planned to kind of report out to each other what we may have figured out. And I went ahead and proposed just a starting point for some sort of a process based on what I've taken in from some of the research that Todd and I did, conversations we've had, and just my experience being in the hiring process before. So I think that's where we are. So that's today. Here's our agenda. We can't obviously approve it since we don't have a quorum or a majority here, but that's the general gist of what we'll go forward. Mark or Todd, do you want to add or change anything on this agenda? So then the timeline in general, where we're going, this is our second meeting, the March-April meeting, begin drafting. And this is sort of taking it step by step. It might evolve over time, but this is the general direction we're going to get this in place before we need to go through a hiring process later this year. And so last time we talked about this meeting, going through the job description and the HR examples and other agency examples. As I mentioned and as sent to the committee and was posted online, I kind of proposed a process that we can go over here in a second. I did not get to reviewing the job description for the public records advocate at this stage. But if anybody else did, this I think is the time where I would look to my colleagues on the committee. Does anybody have any examples or research or observations on the job description as it stands now that you want to share with the group? Todd?
Yeah, I'll just say during the previous hiring process, when the PRAC had to undertake hiring an advocate after the departure of the former one, they created the current job description essentially anew, and Mark could probably speak to this better than I can, and put a fair amount of detail into it to update it. So I don't know if additional work is needed on that front. I feel like it was pretty descriptive, and compared to what I remember the original job posting back in maybe 2017, it was sort of like a vague paragraph, right, Mark? Oh wow, one of my dogs is howling outside. Sorry. And since and they did a great job, in my opinion. It was pretty clear what I was applying for back then.
Yeah, I think it was fine, and I apologize for my poor.
Mark, I can barely hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me a little better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do agree with Todd. We did put together a pretty detailed job description when we went out for the hiring process when Todd ultimately landed the permanent job. I do think that it would be helpful for us to find that job description. I have no idea where it is. I suspect that DAS would have it. I'm trying to recall who was responsible for putting out the job availability announcement. But my recollection was that it was DAS.
I think I have a copy of it. Maybe I collected it in the last few months, so I might have a version that I can share with the committee.
And I may have it too buried away in my copious electronic crack file.
Sure, sure. I think for today's meeting, I think that's a good to note that the job description's been updated relatively recently, and it should be in overall good shape. And we'll distribute it to the entire bylaws committee to have an opportunity to take that over, look that over. Great. Assuming there's nothing else about the job description, anybody have any other hiring examples or research reports to provide at this stage?
I perhaps had a question on that, Scott.
Sure.
My recollection, and I apologize, I haven't looked at the materials that you had sent out since you actually sent them out. I've been involved with a thing called the legislative session and trying to wrap up what they did to us. So forgive me, I haven't looked at that more recently, but I was curious about the DAS HR examples. I think you had used two examples, one from OGEC and then the long-term care ombudsman or something like that. And I was just wondering if we're going to review those examples today.
Todd, good questions, Mark. Todd, my recollection is OGEC actually didn't provide us a whole lot that was directly usable because turned out theirs was an appointee by the governor senate process as well. So the only one that we found was remotely close was the long-term care ombudsman. And off the top of my head, I can't remember where those, I'm assuming we shared those materials. Did we share those materials with the bylaws committee? Do you remember?
Well, honestly, I don't recall which material. I remember the conversation, but did we receive much in the way of materials from them?
In my folder, I'm looking here, I see a couple of things. In particular, the Director 360 guidance document they sent us. I'll share that with the subcommittee.
That sounds good. Maybe it'd be helpful to detail to Mark and everyone what they told us about their process.
Yep. I apologize, Mark, that we didn't do that before today, but we will. I'll share with you or via Todd the notes from that long-term care ombudsman. And I feel like we did contact DAS, but I don't know that they had much to share. Is that your recollection, Todd?
No, I gave you our HR business partner's contact information. I wasn't sure if you reached out to her yet. As of not, in my experience, they would play an advisory or an administrative role, but not have much substantive involvement given our status as independent. But then my office contracts with them for services, including, care of the PRAC. And so I'm sure they'd be ready to assist if needed, but wouldn't really define the process.
I feel like I emailed somebody at DAS and I'll revisit that. I kind of feel like they didn't have a whole lot to share with us at this juncture. But to say that when we go to hire, they would be our partner in terms of the posting and the logistics of that process. I'll double check that too. Other than those examples, which we'll share further with the bylaws committee, is there anything else that people wanted to bring up? If not, then moving on to the next one. This is just the screenshot flow of what I sent to the group. There was text below it that kind of described each step. This is just a really starting place. I mean, I'm not necessarily advocating this is what we adopt wholeheartedly, but based on my experience on hiring panels and input from the long-term care ombudsman, a lot of what we talked about in that discussion was they do what they call a 360 review of their executive director. Just sort of like you can take it in several different directions, but how are things going, more or less, especially important if you have an incumbent who's probably interested in retaining the position, an opportunity for the governing body to do this 360. And here they may have had help from DAS, but they conducted this 360 essentially get the report of that, and they have a discussion. Either could be an executive, depending on perhaps the nature of the report, or it can be in a public meeting. Just kind of review that 360 review, and then from there be a decision point for the governing body, the PRAC, to if the review turned out well and the conversation with the PRA goes well, then we could move on to one of two options there. Yeah, Mark.
I like this idea of a 360 review. I guess my question to you is, Scott, I apologize, there's an echo, so it's very hard to concentrate here. My question, I guess, is who would be doing the review? So would we be asking the public and those who have taken place in consultative services by the advocate to provide that review to the PRA review committee?
Excellent question. I think the general gist of what the LTCO did is they created a bylaw. They created a subcommittee of their governing body to have like 1 or 2 members, and then work with HR DAS, and then they put out questions to the staff. So that's relatively limited in this case. Could be members of the council, but that's who it's reporting to, but the staff. And then in this case, my thought would be probably folks that have worked with the advocate's office. So maybe want to consider the local government, state government, special districts, sort of get a range of, and you're not asking probably for a ton, maybe, I don't know what the number is, 3, 4, 5 to provide input. That would be my thought. Sorry, Mark, I can't hear you. I can't think of any other in the long-term care ombudsman example. I can't think of. I'll look at the notes, but it was generally like agency staff and customers provide the feedback. Not sure who the other groups might be, other stakeholders. But. Oh, members of the press. Oh, sure. I think. Well, my initial reaction to that question, Mark, would be that's one of the customer stakeholder groups for the PRA. So I think that'd be a natural group of folks. So we would do that 360, and I'm sure there'd be a conversation that PRAC would need to have. Trying to call back in, got it. And then from there, I mean, if the review goes well, and then the current PRA is interested, then we could probably just proceed to negotiating a new contract and getting that in place before the current one expires in October. The other decision tree would be if there is an interest in doing a recruitment, and it could be even if the incumbent is interested and it went well, it could be that the feeling of the PRAC is that we should do a recruitment process for good measure. Then we would work with HR DAS to update job description if it's necessary and put it out there and do recruitment for a couple months, and then hold interviews before coming to a selection at the end of that. So, Mark's trying to call back in, so I'll give that a second.
Okay. There we go. See if that helps. So I'm trying to, once we get a 360 review, I want to talk about the PRA review. One of the decision points that I think is really going to be important is whether or not it is a public meeting or an executive session. And I've struggled with this mightily. It's the one thing that I've been sort of high-centered on, if you will, because I do think that it's important for us as a council to have frank and direct conversation while also providing the public an opportunity for input. And I apologize for this feedback. My inclination is that we do both. Because again, I think it's really important for us to have that frank and direct conversation as a deliberative body, while being fair to the individual who we are discussing. And so my inclination, Scott, is to have a public discussion where the public can provide input to the review committee. But then once that information is provided to the review committee can enter into an executive session to have a deliberative discussion and make a recommendation. That's my thinking at the moment, anyway. And I'll put myself on mute, hopefully, to avoid this echo chamber that I'm creating for everybody. I apologize.
We're all there with you, Mark. And at this point in the life we have post-pandemic, we've all been in that echo chamber. If I can attempt to summarize, Todd, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, Mark, you may actually have to turn down the volume on us when you're talking, because I think your phone is picking up our volume coming out of the computer, and then you'll have to turn it back up when you want to hear us again.
Oof. Oh, what one? Mark, what?
Is that any better? I think
Yeah.
It is. Hey, Todd, you're my new IT go-to man. How can I fix my microphone on my computer? Sorry, I apologize.
No, that was good. Thank you, Todd, for that. And Mark, I think if I can summarize what you were saying, you believe that the review piece for the public records advocate should be both have a public component and an executive session to balance the need for receiving public input and also allowing a space for the council to have a frank discussion about the review findings, but then also the office of the advocate. And I would just say that I agree with that sentiment completely. So I would really like to build both those elements into a review as well. And I feel like that's probably makes the most sense to do that review piece first, and then yeah. So I think that's great. I agree with that. I kind of did a summary already of what's on the screen there. Pending the discussion in that public and then that executive review part, we would then proceed to whatever the recommendation is. So I don't know if I have much more to elaborate on this in terms of what I've written here. But Mark or Todd, maybe do you have any other further thoughts on a hiring practice?
Well, Scott, I guess, you can hear me, correct? Okay. I think we got from 1 and 2, right? So now we're at the to retain or to recruit portion. And I think that, Todd, you're going to have to help us out here. If we decided to retain, is it at that point that do we have to actually negotiate a contract with the advocate? Todd?
Well, let me answer that, and then I want to say something else. So the way it works for state hiring in general, at least in my experience, and certainly since pay equity was instituted, which applies to agency leaders like myself, is that if there's a desire to hire a particular candidate, a background check is conducted. As long as the candidate passes that background check, DAS HR, I guess, conducts a pay,
Uh-oh.
which determines, what the appropriate, pay level is for that person within the range described in the job. That offer is made to the applicant, at which point there is room for some negotiation as to whether or not they can go a little higher if that's what the person's asking for. There are guidelines around this that you would need to get assistance from DAS on, but at the same time, because of our independence, I think there's a lot more latitude here as compared to someone else. And not to shoot myself in the foot in case you're looking to save money, but I am currently at the top step of my range anyway, so I don't know if if I were the selected person, if there's much that could actually be done anyway.
Right. I guess the push question is, and Scott and Todd, you're going to have to answer this, and maybe we have to talk to HR at DAS. If we decided to retain the existing advocate, I would hope that we could kick the can to DAS HR to finish that work. I don't think that we as a public record advisory council have been asked to negotiate contracts. We have been asked to either hire or fire the advocate, depending on the circumstance. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but it seems like negotiating the terms and conditions of the advocate's employment is sort of outside of our responsibilities. But knowing that you're an independent, as independent as any agency head could possibly be in our state's government, I don't know who the appropriate person is to do that.
Well,
I guess
yeah.
That's my question.
Well, my past experience might be helpful. So I really don't think the PRAC itself should be conducting the pay equity analysis. That's what the experts of DAS for. And that's what that's what our budget in part is for, is to pay them for these services. So I think they will conduct that. I will say there were salary negotiations last time when I was appointed as the permanent advocate, and those were conducted between me and DAS and the governor's office, because at that time it was the governor's office that had hiring authority. So I do think DAS can establish the numbers, the range for you, but it would, like, if you chose me and I accepted and I was attempting to negotiate my salary, I actually do think it is this council that would have the final word on, yes, we'll give him more, or no, we'll stick it whatever he came in on at the pay equity analysis, because it is the PRAC that's the hiring authority now for this role. So again, I don't think you need to do nuts and bolts. I do think it might be the council, though, that has to do the negotiation, which would be odd and confusing and even how, but I do think you might be stuck with that, Mark. And maybe it's you as chair, or maybe you and Shasta as chair and vice chair, and maybe you'll need to be empowered by the PRAC to do that. I'm not sure. So these are questions I think that we probably need to have answered.
I just think we need to get some answers from perhaps DAS on this very question of who, once the council makes a decision to retain or to hire a new person, right? You're going to have to negotiate a contract at some point, right? Because
and a lot.
If we decided to recruit, we recruit, we interview, and then, Scott, you're missing another bubble there. You have to negotiate a contract, and then the PRAC apparently approves the contract.
And Mark, I will add, I really think the only part that is up in the air would be salary, because, the terms of the office are established in statute. The time of service is 4 years, that's established in statute. But certainly if a candidate, like say the candidate doesn't land at the top step in the pay equity analysis, but you have that wiggle room to consider other factors and increase their pay, then right, someone would have to do that. And I think it is the PRAC as the hiring authority.
And I think the example we have in the long-term care ombudsman, which may not have been charged with negotiating salary, but I feel like that body appointed a subcommittee of like 1 or 2 members to probably take the lead on all of it. I could very well be comfortable with the chair and vice chair doing that in our case, but that's definitely a question that I think we'd want to think about. Who's taking lead in negotiating?
Well, and my subsequent question, and I don't, I'm sorry, I don't mean to try to complicate things, but let's say the chair and the vice chair did negotiate a salary. Would DAS and HR accept that? I mean, that's the sort of conundrum that we're facing here, because this is a new animal that has been created, frankly, right? And we don't know how that animal gets from point A to point B. And that's why I think a discussion with DAS and in particular HR needs to be conducted so that we have clarity on these questions, I guess. And it's going to be new to them as well. But I think it's important that we as a council, the advocate, DAS, HR, all are on the same page, because God forbid, we go through the entire process, we negotiate a contract, and all of a sudden DAS and HR say, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, we have a problem with X, Y, or Z. What happens? We need clarity on that, and that's where I get a little, I begin to stumble, and I don't mean to be problematic here. I'm just trying to be practical.
Totally agree, Mark. Totally agree. I will double down my effort to reach out to DAS HR and to maybe invite them to come to our next meeting of this group.
I think that might be helpful, just to talk about, once we identify a candidate, whether it's the existing candidate or a new candidate, who's doing what, and do we have the authority to do what each side has agreed to do, right? And are both sides gonna be willing to accept those agreements, if you will?
Yep. I totally agree with you. I will on this, I think it's a fair question. There's a couple questions. One question that you raised, I think the bylaws committee should come to a conclusion, make a recommendation for full council. But who's the negotiators for us? That's a thing to chew on. We can talk about next time. And then reaching out to DAS HR and getting, hopefully someone can come at our next meeting, or if nothing else, some answers to these questions. I agree with everything you're saying and questioning.
Well, that's a relief that somebody does.
Right. Anything else? So this is a starting point. I will, informed by this conversation and future conversations, but also with DAS, I'll update this graphic. So this isn't, where we're ending. But anything else we want to talk about in terms of hiring practices for today?
Well, I'm just wondering, are we at a point where at the next PRAC meeting, which hopefully more members will respond so we could set it soon for early April, is it time to suggest a path to them or paths for the full council to vote on? So like, for instance, if they adopt this path, do a 360 to determine, retain, or recruit, that'll define our work moving forward, or do you think it's too soon?
I would like to have said if we had had a quorum here and we could have come to some more concrete solutions, and frankly, if I had done a better job of reaching out to DAS HR before today, I think I would have been in a better spot personally to feel like the full PRAC should talk about it. I am comfortable reporting to the full PRAC, and I don't know how much of a conversation we want at that point, but I'm kind of feeling like we need to chew on this, at least one more meeting of this bylaws committee before the full PRAC takes any stand. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that it's March, middle of March. Before you know it, it's going to be June. And we need to get a review. If that's where we're going, we need to get that initiated sooner than later.
Hey, Scott, when's our next meeting scheduled, or do we have one scheduled yet?
I think my initial proposal was going to be for like May, June, but of course, subject to the inevitable when we're available.
We may need to accelerate that just a little bit.
Yep.
Trying to find a meeting between now and that. I'm sorry, I didn't see that you changed the screen on me.
Sorry.
On the timeline. There we go. Before May and June, right? Maybe we need something in April, just a brief touch that sort of updates the linear process that you had created. That includes maybe this 360 review before. Let's go down. I'm sorry. I wish I could control the pages here. If you could go down to your linear process.
This one?
That's the one. So sort of a outreach is the first step, that sort of 360 review of the public and maybe even members of the PRAC itself, right? Then the PRA will take public comments, or the PRAC will take public comments from those who want to provide input. And then the PRAC goes into an executive process to review, to make a decision, right? Whether to retain or recruit. I do think, though, that we would have to make it a public meeting at the time of the decision, whether to retain or to recruit, right?
Yep.
Because that is actually an action that we're taking, right? And so that would have to be public.
Agreed.
And then what we need are those discussions to take place between us and HR as to who does what with each other's understanding and approval, right? And then I think the PRAC has to empower either the chair and vice chair or other members who want to be involved in the negotiation, and we wrap it up.
Yep. I agree. I took all those notes. I'm going to update this graphic and the draft text that's below this in the thing I sent out earlier to include all those pieces.
And then what we can do, hopefully we can have a quorum at the next meeting to get the approval of the subcommittee to bring this to the full council.
Here.
If my sequencing is correct here.
I think so. And Todd, I feel like there was a reason you wanted the council to meet in April beyond this. So I hope that we're not throwing off the full PRAC's timeline for holding meetings. No,
Mark. Mark and Shasta decided on a short meeting to check in about the legislative session and one or two other things. So I think Mark, you had said 15 minutes. We said maybe it'll actually be 30, but it's going to be a short meeting in April, kind of a check-in for everyone and an update. And then we'll add your update to this as well, Scott. Just let everybody know where we're at.
Perfect.
And I guess that'll define our work moving forward.
Sorry, Todd, when is that April meeting of the full PRAC? Do you recall?
I'm still trying to get enough members, not including those present in this meeting, to fill out.
You have a doodle out there that I haven't responded to, so my bad. I get it. I'm still just catching up from what I said earlier.
It's okay, and I'm going to be out the 19th to the 26th. I was hoping to lock this in beforehand, but that may not happen. We'll see.
Okay. Well, I think what we need to do here, Scott, if I may be so bold, is trying to get another meeting of this subcommittee prior to whenever that April full PrAC meeting is going to take place. And I'll be as flexible as possible, but I do think that it's going to be important for us to get the approval of the subcommittee to bring this sort of flow chart, updated flow chart, to the full PrAC by April so that we can set this thing in motion. I do have another question though, and I think that this is probably directed to Todd and Yufang, sorry. Who puts together a 360 review?
There are options, including paying outside parties. The state is moving towards doing that for executive directors. I'm not sure yet if I'm actually subject to that, given our small size. It would be incredibly expensive and may not occur by the time it's needed for this council. The Government Ethics Commission did volunteer their deputy director, not government ethics, long-term care ombudsman did volunteer their deputy director. It's a little consternation given the professional relationships involved to draft that 360, collect and compile the information, and then provide it in like a presentation form to their council to decide what to do. And I think it's worth noting that what we learned from them is this was actually their first time doing this as well. Previously, their council wasn't involved in the retention or appointment of a long-term care ombudsman. So this is the process they settled on for themselves that made sense. Let's collect information on the incumbent through a 360 and use that information to decide, are we going to reappoint or are we going to go to a new hiring process? So she did do it. It sounded like she did a really good job. Yufang has graciously volunteered, if necessary, to do it for us as well. And she's in contact with their deputy director and can get this information. So, but I don't want to speak for the council. It's, I have this unique relationship to the process. So if the council ultimately prefers to go that way, she is available. And we thank her for her service.
Yeah, no. I apologize. I very much appreciate that because that is obviously a critical component and will be the first thing we need to sort of kick off. And if I appreciate you, Yufang, you're always in the background hiding, and I'm glad to see your face here today. But I do think that it's important for us to understand how that will work and move forward as well. I agree with you, Todd, that hiring an outside consultant to do that is probably a budget buster. And if there's a way for us to do so in a manner that is, well, not necessarily wholly comprehensive, but gives us a good sense of stakeholder viewpoints, I think that that's fine. I also feel pretty strongly that members of the council have a pretty strong grasp of your work and your office's work as well. So I just want to be sure, though, that we do have input from outside stakeholders who are not members of the council. And so if there is a process to undertake a 360 review, as you have described there is, and that Yufang would be sort of leading that, I feel much better knowing that the council won't have to actually undertake that, because I think that that would be a pretty substantial undertaking. So I'll shut up. I've probably spoken far too much today already.
We appreciate it, Mark. No, and I agree with your sentiments. And I also want to say thank you, Yufang, for being open to taking on that task. And I'm frankly glad that the long-term care ombudsman's team's gone through it first. Because there's few secrets in some regards in government, and cribbing from other agencies like this is what we should do when it makes sense.
Yeah.
So thank you, Yufang.
Yeah, thank you, Yufang.
I I think all fair point. I'm going to be doing quite a bit of updating to this graphic and the text that was underneath it in the exhibit I sent out earlier. I think this is great. And I'm sorry, Yufeng, you turned your camera on. Did Yufeng want to say anything?
I could just add that I have actually, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Since we're all
yeah,
having
I can hear you.
technical difficulties. So I actually have the agency performance review criteria open right now, and it will include all direct reports, which will be easy since we're such a small agency. Parties of interest, so I think that can include, I suppose, the customers that the Office of the Public Records Advocate serves, so members of the media, kind of routine requesters, folks who reach out, and we can determine how we want to frame that, but it's pretty broad. I mean, I think there's a lot of space for us to be creative about what kind of input and how much input we want from interested parties. Of course, board and commission members is expressly a part of the consideration. So I think all current members of the PRAC, potentially even past members of the PRAC, would be recipients of a survey as well. But again, we can be fairly creative with that.
Yep.
Right.
That's
And we don't want, I think it's going to be important for us to ensure that we don't make it too big and cumbersome, that people get overwhelmed with it. I think this shouldn't be a review that takes an individual more than 10 minutes to provide some useful feedback, right? I think we can get too much into the weeds, and I'd prefer to avoid that, and also encourage feedback by not making it too onerous. So I guess I'm sorry, Scott and Todd and Yufeng and those of you who else are. I guess I do have one other question. We are a part of the bylaw committee, right? We're a subcommittee of the bylaw committee. And when I think of bylaws, I think of written words, right? Not flow charts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I guess my question is, and flow charts, pictures 1,000 words, right? But we don't have words here that would be actually put into bylaws. And I guess the question, Scott, is, and Todd, if we're creating bylaws for the hiring or the recruitment of the PRA, do we need, I don't think we can put a flow chart into the bylaw. Well, we could put a flow chart into the bylaws, but does it need to be in written word as well? I guess that's my question, and there it is. Perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Mark. And these are the words that I flowing around my head, and we've talked about things. So this is, obviously done before today's meeting. So after today's session, I'm going to go and update all this to reflect what we talked about, the pieces, the steps, and the graphic. But I totally agree with you. And I don't even know, I think we'll have to see how it plays out, but I don't even know if all this exact text needs to go into the bylaws, depending how proscriptive we want the bylaws to be. Sometimes it's nice to be vaguer, but absolutely, I agree with you. We need written stuff, and I've taken a swing at it, but we'll chew on this one here.
Great.
Yeah,
and actually, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think this work is to define what the process will be. Like, for instance, if the PRAC agrees, yes, if there's an incumbent advocate and they, and they're seeking reappointment, is step one a 360? If step one is a 360, then that becomes the process that could be written into the bylaws, so that next time we don't have to go through this. We say, oh, there's an incumbent advocate, they're seeking reappointment. So we do a 360 and then decide after that, retain, recruit. Oh, they're not seeking reappointment, go right to recruiting. So I think what we're doing now is figuring that out, and then we can reduce it to a permanent bylaw after that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool. This is, despite the lack of a quorum, I think this has been a productive conversation. I think it'll go a long way to updating this. I think I agree with Mark. Let's try to get another meeting, hopefully with a quorum before our next full prac. If that doesn't happen and if nothing else at the next prac meeting, I can provide an update. But
Yeah, Scott, if we can't achieve a quorum for approval, I'll take the chair's prerogative and just say, this is what we came up with. We couldn't reach a quorum to formally approve this to bring it forward to you, but my suspicion is that if we have a very short meeting and describe what it is we talked about today, there's probably going to be very little, I hope there's very little pushback or need for changes.
I'll share your optimism. And so with that, I do know that there's other folks on this call. So the rest of the slides I had just basically lead us into starting to draft it, which I think there may be a start here of writing the actual text. So we'll work on that. And then the other slide was an opportunity to take public comment. So, and then again, it's an advisory meeting. We don't have a quorum present. And I believe Todd and Mark, anything else to say before we take public comment? Okay.
Thank you for your work on this, Scott. Really appreciate it. And I think that it really helped sort of crystallize how we need to move forward on this. And I think today's discussion has really sort of sharpened it to the point where I'm comfortable going before the full prac, but agree with you that we need to get sign off from the rest of the members of this subcommittee.
Agree. Let's give it a try and just be real enough to know that we may have to just go back to the full council. So with that being said, let's open the floor to public comment. Again, this is advisory. We don't have a quorum present. But if anybody who is here, not on the bylaws subcommittee, would like to make a remark, this is your opportunity. So does anybody want to say anything?
Come on, Melissa.
Give it 15 more
All
seconds. Yeah. In case someone's scrambling to find the unmute button or their mic's not working. But it looks like we're good. So I think that was our final piece of business. Anything else for the good of the order? I think we've covered and summarized it a couple times at this point.
I'm just a little confused on dates. I'm trying to set this the full prac meeting for early April. Are we trying to meet as the bylaws subcommittee before that? And if so, I probably won't be able to join.
That was the ideal. I think I'm also out the same. It sounds like you're out spring break week, Todd.
Yeah, and then actually I get back on the 26th, and 2 days later I have to drive my older daughter to Spokane for a volleyball tournament, so I'll be out that Friday as well.
I think we can write March off, and yeah, probably write March off. So I think if you don't mind giving it a try to reach out to the bylaws subcommittees just to see if there's a 15-30 minute sliver somewhere that exists. I think I would feel better going to the full prac and saying, like Mark suggested, we tried, we have a meeting, didn't work, come together. So if you don't mind at least giving it an attempt to get a bylaws committee together before the next prac meeting, I think we'd appreciate that. But going into that, fully understanding that this is where we are.
Yeah, and I think the idea here is hopefully, Scott, you will have been able to update the flow chart and the actual wordsmithing so that we can share with the subcommittee that it is our intent to get your approval of this process, to bring it to the full committee. And again, this shouldn't take more than 15 minutes unless there are questions or concerns. If there are questions or concerns, we would hope that the members of the subcommittee would share those prior to the meeting actually taking place, right? So that we may be able to address those or, in advance of the meeting so that we can get swift approval.
Cheers to being as efficient as possible. Yeah, so being realistic, but yeah, let's try to see if we can get some. Anything else?
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, anything else?
Hey, again, thank you, Scott, for all your work on this. Really appreciate it, and glad you are chairing this subcommittee.
Happy to do it. Happy to write it out, and we'll
Here,
hopefully
here.
Thank you both. So with that, I think we will call this advisory meeting to adjournment, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Hey, thanks again.
Thanks.